The shriek of the wind over the Atlantic was a physical blow. Rain, driven horizontal, hammered against the steel superstructure of the USS Stalwart. On the recovery vessel's flight deck, secured by impossibly thick chains, sat 5 ghosts, 5 TBM Avenger torpedo bombers, their sea blue paint gleaming under the emergency floodlights, as if they had just rolled off the Grumman factory line in 1945. Their canopies were clear, their tires perfectly inflated. They should have been skeletons of corroded aluminum, claimed by 70-odd years at the bottom of the sea. Instead, they looked angry. A low, resonant hum vibrated up through the deck plates, a sound that felt older than metal. Inside the cockpit of the lead plane, FT-28, a single red light began to pulse on the instrument panel. It had no battery, it had no power source, yet it blinked, a steady, rhythmic heartbeat in the heart of the storm. "What is that frequency?" Commander Eva Rostova yelled, her voice barely carrying over the gale. Her face, illuminated by the red glow of the alarm strobes, was a mask of rigid control. Beside her, Dr. Eris Thorne stared at a ruggedized tablet, his knuckles white where he gripped its case. The screen displayed a scanned image of a single page, the last page of a pilot's logbook. It was filled with symbols that looked like a cross between stellar cartography and the frantic scratches of a dying man. He was the only person on the planet who believed it was a language. "It's not a frequency," Thorne shouted back, his eyes locked on the pulsing light in the cockpit. "It's a response. It's reading the storm." The hum from the 5 planes intensified, the vibration rising in pitch until it was a tangible pressure against their eardrums. The ship's own lights flickered. The navigational arrays on the mast spun erratically. They were in the middle of the Atlantic, but according to their own instruments, they were nowhere at all. This narrative is a fictional scenario. It is built around the very real and very enduring mystery of Flight 19. On December 5, 1945, 5 Avenger bombers lifted off from Naval Air Station Fort Lauderdale for a routine training exercise. Flight 19. 14 airmen, led by an experienced instructor, Lieutenant Charles Taylor. They completed their practice bombing run over the Hen and Chickens shoals, then turned north. And then they vanished. Radio transcripts captured their final hours. Confusion, compasses malfunctioning. Taylor, a veteran of the Pacific Theater, was heard saying both of his had failed. He was certain they were over the Florida Keys, but the controllers were adamant they were far to the east, over the Bahamas. His last coherent message was an order for his squadron to ditch their planes together when the first one ran out of fuel. They were never heard from again. A Martin Mariner flying boat, dispatched with a 13-man crew to search for them, also vanished from radar in the same area. 27 men, 6 aircraft, erased from the world in a single afternoon. The official Navy report cited causes or reasons unknown. Over the decades, the story became a cornerstone of the Bermuda Triangle legend, a tale of mysterious forces and unexplained disappearances. The planes were gone. The men were gone. There was nothing left but a ghost story. Until a deep-sea survey drone named Argo 4, mapping the desolate abyssal plain of the Blake Plateau for a new transatlantic fiber-optic cable, drifted off its programmed course. Its sonar painted a picture that made no sense. 5 distinct, man-made objects sitting upright on the seafloor at a depth of 4,000 meters. They were arranged in a geometrically perfect pentagon, so precise it looked like they had been placed there by a divine hand. The drone's cameras swept in, its lights cutting through the eternal darkness. And there they were. Flight 19, intact, unblemished, waiting. The recovery operation was a masterpiece of military secrecy and engineering prowess. The USS Stalwart, a vessel designed for retrieving nuclear submarines and downed spy satellites, was dispatched under the cover of a deep ocean salvage drill. When the first Avenger broke the surface, a stunned silence fell over the crew. Dr. Kenji Tanaka, the lead materials scientist from DARPA, ran a gloved hand over the wing. There was no marine growth, no pitting from saltwater corrosion. The U.S. Navy Star insignia was as crisp as the day it was painted. "The alloy," Tanaka had murmured to Commander Rostova, his voice tight with disbelief. "The aluminum is wrong. It's resonating, like a tuning fork that was struck 70 years ago and never stopped vibrating." The true anomaly, however, was found inside the cockpit of FT-28, Lieutenant Taylor's plane. In a waterproof pouch tucked behind the pilot's seat was the flight log. It was perfectly dry. The leather cover was supple. The paper was crisp. The first few pages were exactly what they expected, routine entries in Taylor's neat hand, detailing fuel loads, weather conditions, and the start of the training flight on December 5th. Then the entries changed. The date at the top of the next page was December 6th, 1945. The handwriting was still Taylor's, but it was shakier, more urgent. It described flying through a sky of boiling purple with stars that were wrong. He wrote of unfamiliar constellations, of a sun that was too large and too red. The next entry was dated May 11th, 1951. The handwriting belonged to another pilot from the squadron. It detailed a combat mission, dropping ordnance on a crystalline city that rose from a desert of black sand. Another, from October 23, 1968, described a dogfight against ships that moved like shattered glass, firing lances of pure light. The logbook chronicled 70 years of impossible warfare. The pilots of Flight 19 had not ditched in the Atlantic. They had fought a war. They had grown old. They had died, one by one, their deaths noted in the margins. The final dated entry, from 2023, was written by the last surviving crewman. It simply said, "The sky is finally quiet. They are sending us home." And then there was the last page. It was not handwriting. It was a sequence of elegant, terrifyingly complex symbols. They were arranged in precise geometric patterns, glowing with a faint, silvery light that seemed to emanate from the ink itself. That was when Commander Rostova called Dr. Eris Thorne. Thorne was a pariah in the world of linguistics. A decade earlier, he had staked his entire career on a new translation of a pre-Sumerian clay tablet, claiming it was not a record of grain harvests but a complex astronomical chart. When further analysis proved him spectacularly wrong, his reputation evaporated. He was relegated to a dusty office at a minor university, a brilliant mind exiled for one catastrophic failure of intellect. He was chosen for this assignment not because he was the best, but because he was deniable. If he failed, no one of importance would notice. He was flown to the Stalwart by helicopter, stepping onto a ship already humming with a tension that had nothing to do with the sea. Rostova greeted him with a curt nod and a data tablet. "We have a text we need translated," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "The official position is that it is a hoax. Your job is to prove it." But the moment Thorne saw the symbols, he knew. This was no hoax. This was a syntax, a grammar. It had structure. It had intent. It was a language written by a mind that did not think in linear sentences, but in multidimensional concepts. His past failure had been born of hubris, of seeing patterns where there were none. This time the pattern was real. It was terrifyingly, beautifully real. For 3 days, he worked in a sealed cabin, the ship steaming towards a secure naval base in Virginia. He barely ate. He barely slept. He cross-referenced the symbols with the star charts sketched in the margins of the logbook. He compared their geometry to the flight paths described in the combat reports. He wasn't just translating words. He was trying to comprehend a different form of physics. The language isn't descriptive, he told Rostova and Tanaka in the ship's briefing room, his voice hoarse with fatigue and excitement. It's operational. The symbols for sky and engine are related. The symbol for navigation is a variable in an equation that includes the symbol for constellation. They weren't flying these planes with combustion and aerodynamics. They were using them to solve an equation. The destination was the answer. Tanaka, ever the empiricist, was skeptical. The materials science is already impossible, Eris. The plane's molecular structure is stable, but excited. They're saturated with a form of radiation we can't identify. But a language that rewrites. Physics, that's not science. It is if the physics were written that way in the first place, Thorne countered, pointing to the final page on the monitor. This isn't a story. It's an instruction manual, a mission order. A mission order for what? Rostova asked, her arms crossed. Her pragmatism was a bulkhead against which Thorne's theories crashed. To come home, Thorne said softly. The last entry says they were being sent home. This page is the instruction. Return to original launch point. The Atlantic. It was then that the first of the ship's compasses began to spin. The crisis escalated with methodical precision. It began with the magnetometers, then spread to the GPS. Within an hour, every navigational system on the Stalwart was useless. They were electronically blind. A storm began to gather directly overhead, a churning vortex of black clouds that had not appeared on any weather satellite. It was unnatural, a storm with a purpose. And then the planes woke up. The low hum started, a vibration that seemed to come from the very atoms of the 5 Avengers. It was the sound Tanaka had warned them about, the resonant frequency of the strange radiation, now amplifying itself. The cockpit light on FT-28 began its steady, rhythmic pulse. The storm overhead responded, lightning arcing between the clouds, not striking down, but weaving a web of energy directly above the ship. Which brought them back to the wind-lashed deck, with Rostova shouting orders and Thorne staring at the impossible text. The hum was now a grinding, soul-shaking drone. The air crackled with ozone. "The field is expanding!" Tanaka yelled from the bridge entryway, his own tablet in hand. "The radiation isn't contained to the aircraft anymore. It's enveloping the ship. Whatever this is, it's a catalyst. The planes are the trigger, but the storm is the bomb." Rostova turned to her chief petty officer. "Get the Marine detachment on deck. I want thermite charges placed on the fuselages of all 5 aircraft. We are neutralizing this threat, now." "Commander, no." Thorne grabbed her arm, his academic composure gone, replaced by raw fear. "You can't. You don't know what will happen. This isn't a weapon, it's a gateway. Destroying it could be like setting off a bomb inside an unlocked door. You might just blow it wide open." "That's a risk I'm willing to take," Rostova snapped, shaking him off. "My orders are to contain any anomalous technology. This is no longer contained. We are losing the ship, Doctor. Those planes are turning the ocean itself into a component in a machine we don't understand. I will not let it finish the circuit." The Marines, clad in heavy storm gear, began to move across the treacherous deck, carrying dull green packs of thermite. They moved with grim efficiency, their faces set against the wind and the unnatural hum. Thorne's mind raced, his gaze darting between the glowing symbols on his tablet and the pulsing light in the cockpit of FT-28. A mission order. Return to launch point. But why? Why send them back after 70 years? Why leave an instruction manual written in a language only a 1 in a billion genius or a fool like him could even begin to comprehend? It was too neat, too convenient. It was a trap. The realization hit him with the force of a physical impact. The pilots weren't sent home. They were bait. The logbook wasn't a record. It was an invitation. The final page wasn't a mission order for the planes. It was a command sequence for the finders. It was a key, left in a lock, waiting for someone to turn it. He looked at the symbols again, not as a linguist, but as a cryptographer. He saw the patterns, the recurring values, the operational syntax. He had seen this kind of logic before in the failed translation that had ruined him. He had mistaken a star chart for a harvest ledger because he had failed to understand the context. He would not make that mistake again. The constellations sketched in the logbook, they weren't just wrong. They were charts for navigating through folded space-time. The combat wasn't a war, it was a transit. Flight 19 had been taken, converted into vessels that didn't fly through the sky, but punched through the fabric of reality itself. And now, the entity that had taken them wanted the doorway back open. The storm wasn't just a power source, it was a resonant key, shaping the local space-time to accept the incoming, whatever it was. "Commander," Thorne screamed, running toward her as a wave crashed over the bow, soaking them both in freezing spray. "The symbols! It's not a return address for the planes. It's an activation sequence for a beacon. We're not bringing them home. We're calling their masters." Rostova paused, her hand raised to halt the Marine team. She stared at Thorne, her eyes narrowed, searching his face for any hint of uncertainty. "Prove it." "The geometry of the main sequence," he said, pointing a trembling finger at the tablet. "It corresponds to the location of the ship, the storm, and the planes. It's a triangulation. But this symbol here..." He zoomed in on a single, intricate glyph at the very end of the sequence. "This one doesn't match anything local. It's the destination, the target variable. It's pointing out." He looked up from the screen, his eyes wide with dawning horror. "It's not pulling something from their history. It's opening a hole to their present." The hum from the planes suddenly spiked, a piercing whine that made their teeth ache. The red light in FT-28 began to flash faster. The lightning overhead coalesced, forming a single blindingly bright point of light directly above the mast. "Tanaka, report!" Rostova barked into her radio. "The energy field is reaching critical saturation. It's stabilizing. Whatever it's doing, it's almost done!" Tanaka's voice was strained, terrified. "5 minutes, Doctor," Rostova said, her voice deadly calm. "You have 5 minutes to give me a better option than thermite. After that, my Marines will turn those planes into slag." 5 minutes. 5 minutes to decode a language that had been used to rewrite the laws of physics. 5 minutes to avert a potential invasion by an entity that treated star systems like subway stops. Thorne's mind went into overdrive. He couldn't destroy the message. The risk of a catastrophic misfire was too great. He couldn't let it complete, so he had to change it. He focused on the final glyph, the destination, the address. It was a complex piece of code, but like any code, it had variables. It was based on the wrong constellations in the logbook. He scrolled frantically through the scanned pages, looking at the crude, hand-drawn star charts. One of them was different. It was circled with a notation in English. Silent, dead. It was a system the pilots had observed but never engaged with. An empty, cold corner of the galaxy they had passed by. Could he do it? Could he rewrite the address? Change the destination of the beacon from Earth to that dead system? It was insane. It was theoretical. It was based on a decade-old, discredited theory about how information could be encoded into resonant frequencies to alter quantum states. The very theory that had made him a laughingstock. He looked at the Marines, their hands on the thermite packs. He looked at Rostova, her face a grim calculus of acceptable losses. He looked at the churning vortex in the sky. His failure had cost him his career. This one could cost everyone everything. "I can't stop it," he said, his voice finding a strange calm in the center of the hurricane. "But I think I can redirect it." Rostova's eyes did not leave his. How? The ink on the page, Thorne explained, his fingers flying across his tablet's interface, pulling up a waveform generator app. It's not just ink, it's a quantum medium. It holds the data. The light pulsing in that cockpit is a scanner reading the page. If I can broadcast a specific radio frequency, a simple, modulated pulse, I might be able to alter the quantum state of the ink. Effectively, I can change that one symbol. I can rewrite the address. You think? Rostova's skepticism was a tangible force. You might? It's a better chance than blowing a hole in reality, Thorne shot back. He held up the tablet, showing her the star chart of the dead system. I'm not guessing. The logbook gives me the coordinates. I just need to translate them into the right frequency. I can send the signal there, to nowhere. The point of light in the sky began to descend, a shimmering thread of energy reaching down toward the ship. The hum of the planes became a deafening roar. Do it, Rostova commanded. Thorne didn't need to be told twice. He finished. His calculations, his mind a whirlwind of linguistic theory, quantum mechanics, and desperate hope. He aimed the tablet at the cockpit of FT-28. The device was not designed for this. It was a consumer-grade piece of electronics. He was trying to perform surgery on an alien machine with a stone knife. He took a deep breath, and he pressed Transmit. A barely audible chirp emitted from the tablet's speaker. For a heart-stopping second, nothing happened. The roar continued. The light descended. The world held its breath. Then the roar of the 5 planes changed. It climbed in pitch, soaring past the limits of human hearing into a sound that was felt in their bones, a vibration of pure, unrevolterated power. The light in the cockpit of FT-28 flared, burning a brilliant white, and then went dark. And then, silence. The hum vanished, the roar ceased, the oppressive crackling energy in the air dissipated as if it had never been there. Overhead, the unnatural storm broke apart, the black clouds dissolving into the night sky with impossible speed, revealing a canopy of familiar, comforting stars. The ship's main lights flickered back on, steady and sure. The sea, while still rough, had lost its malevolent purpose. On the deck, everyone stood frozen, staring at the 5 silent planes. They were just machines again. Old, impossibly preserved machines, but nothing more. The Marines lowered their thermite packs, their expressions a mixture of relief and utter confusion. Thorne stumbled, his legs suddenly weak. Rostova caught his arm, holding him steady. He looked down at his tablet. On the screen, the image of the final page of the logbook had changed. The complex sequence of symbols was gone. In its place was a single, perfect circle, an elegant, empty 0. Tanaka's voice crackled over the radio, breathless and filled with awe. Commander, the radiation is gone. The anomalous energy signatures, they've completely flatlined. The planes, they're just metal now. Whatever they were, it's gone. Rostova let out a long, slow breath. She looked at Thorne, not as a pariah, but as something else entirely. What did you do? I changed the address, Thorne said, his voice barely a whisper. He looked out at the dark, now peaceful ocean. The immediate threat was over. They were safe. But a new, colder dread began to settle in his soul. He hadn't just hung up the phone. He hadn't just returned the letter to sender. He had taken a message intended for this solar system, a summons for a vast and ancient power. And he had rerouted it. He had sent it to an empty corner of the cosmos, a dead system in the void. He had proven that the primitives who found the beacon were not only able to read the instructions, but were clever enough to rewrite them. He had answered the door with a note of his own. A note that said, "We know you're there, we know what you are, and we are smart enough to be a problem." The The silence of the Atlantic felt different now. It was no longer the silence of mystery. It was the silence of a held breath. The silence between a question being sent across the void and the inevitable, patient wait for a reply.